Democracy is based upon the conviction there are extraordinary possibilities in ordinary people. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. A topic of discussion today is juggling IMF conditions and future elections. Joining us this evening on the show are Dr. Howard Nicholas, economist, Rohan Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of People's Action for Free and Fair Elections, P.M. Madhushani, Program Manager of Political, TISL, Transparency International Sri Lanka, as well as Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director of Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. Joining us this evening on the show to pose questions from our panelists. On to my immediate right is Naveksha, on to my immediate left is Nadim Majid. And you too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. You too can send in your messages to the WhatsApp number 076 656 5353. The number once again 076 656 5353. Who has an edge as far as the elections are concerned this year? We can talk about all this and more with our panelists tonight, including the role of the IMF with regard to the elections in the country. So let's start off with Dr. Howard Nicholas, economist. Dr. Nicholas, what are your thoughts with regard to the IMF conditions and a future possible election platform or election year in Sri Lanka?
Thank you, Shamin. Pleasure to be here again. Start with the conditions, and the conditions I want to focus on are two. Firstly, the budget deficit and the reduction in the budget deficit. And there, the conditions required Sri Lanka to raise taxes and reduce expenditure. The second condition which I want to focus on is the Central Bank Act and the requirement that the Central Bank does not print to fund the government's budget deficit. The net result, as far as I'm concerned, is that it has put upward pressure on interest rates. Now, the government, heading towards an election, wants to mitigate some of the negative consequences of the IMF conditions and adherence to that. What I see them doing is, first and foremost, trying to reduce food prices, because this has been a bane for lots and lots of ordinary people, especially the poorer sections of the society. And the way they've done it is encouraged imports of food items, and of course the appreciation of the Sri Lankan rupee has also helped that process. Secondly, they've now tried to, they've actually announced that they're going to reduce fuel prices by 10 rupees a litre and also reverse the last round of energy price increases. I might add, on the 10 rupees a litre, this I have read and I've confirmed that actually the reduction could well have been between 100 and 200 rupees without breaking sweat. The other thing they've done is increase social security allocations from 44 million to 200 million. And the last thing they've done, and for me, very, very important, very significant, and I'll come back to that later, is they have managed to get commercial banks to buy a lot of government debt. Now, one statistic I give you, which for me is incredible, is that commercial banks have increased their holding of government debt by 45% in the last year. By 45%. This is quite an astonishing increase, and in my view, not sustainable and positively dangerous.
So, Dr. Howard, when you look at this year being an election year, and 2 days ago we saw President Ranil Wickremesinghe convening a meeting with opposition party members to discuss about the transparency and the way forward as far as the IMF is concerned. Was there any depth to this meeting? Because we saw the manner in which how only one parliamentarian from an opposition party, that was MP Sumandiran, attending the meeting. Was there any basis for the opposition to contribute in terms of IMF conditions? Could they have done something if they attended that meeting?
I think their position was, at least this is what I've read, I have not spoken to any opposition member, but their position was that there should be a renegotiation. And given that position, I don't think they wanted to be used as some sort of rubber stamp or statue in the room. I think their idea was that if there was going to be a serious discussion which would lead to some sort of amendment of the conditions, they would attend. But given that that wasn't the case, I guess they decided that this is not something they wanted to turn up to.
So do you think in the event, we saw the manner in which how Dr. Harsha De Silva, the economist of the SJB, saying that there was no point in attending this meeting, the regulations, the time frame, everything has already been discussed with the IMF. It was only a rubber stamp just to get the opposition involved. Is it so?
I agree with them. I agree with them, and I think there was justification in the opposition not turning up, given that that was the situation.
So you mean to say even if the opposition attended that meeting on that day, 2 days ago, it would have been just a futile meeting in the eyes of the international community because the regulations have already been discussed and agreed upon?
I believe so. I believe so.
So Dr. Howard, I just want to recollect your memory as far as the history is concerned, because I recollect a few years ago when there was a meeting with Dr. Ajit Nivard Cabral as the governor of the central bank at that time. Gotabaya Rajapaksa convened an all-party meeting where Ranil Wickremesinghe was a member who attended this meeting in question. And there was an argument between the then Minister of Finance, Basil Rajapaksa, and Ranil Wickremesinghe with regard to the regulations in terms of the IMF deal that was being discussed upon at that time. Ranil Wickremesinghe went on to say, have you all reached an agreement with the IMF? If so, can I see the document? Then Basil Rajapaksa went on to say, there is no document. Then Ranil Wickremesinghe said, why don't we summon the IMF head to this meeting in question so we can see the regulations, whether it has been tabled or not. Then Basil Rajapaksa went on to say, I can't give that particular confidential document. So do you mean to say that there is a confidential document in the hands of President Ranil Wickremesinghe that he is not presenting to the opposition at this point of time?
I can't speculate on that, Shamya. I just don't have enough knowledge. I mean, I'm sure there are other people who are better placed to tell you what. Because
we saw even the governor of the central bank a few years ago saying because of radio silence, he cannot bring out any, you cannot forecast what's going to happen in the next few days because he is the governor of the central bank. So it goes without saying that there must be something under the sleeves of the president at this point of time.
Oh, there definitely is. I mean, I remember when I was a long time ago working with the Ministry of Finance, there were several different versions of documents that would pass through our hands. And some of these were extremely confidential and others were for public scrutiny. And I think that's normally the case, working with either the IMF or the World Bank.
Thank you very much, Dr. Howard Nicholas, economist. I now move my attention towards Rohan Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of PAFRL. Rohan, I've heard these movements that you've headed in the last few years. 2015, on the 12th of March, spearheaded by PAFRL, you all had the March 12th movement coming into play. This all seems to be just a hoax in the eyes of the public, because we saw the manner in which how the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia took place on the 14th of January 2014. Then we saw the Egypt's January 25th revolution. Those really made an impact. We saw the Arab Spring happening. We saw an impact. But the March 12th movement, no one is talking about, Rohan. Now this is an election year. What's happening?
Well, you haven't seen that the last year this Aragale took place in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, Aragale.
I'm not saying
that's a people's movement.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
On the 12th of January 2015, right after the presidential election, which was boasts about good governance, democracy, and so on and so forth. At that time, Ranil Wickremesinghe also attended that meeting in question in his capacity as the Prime Minister of the country. But what impact have you all done?
Well, now we are talking about this corruption, system change, political culture change. We started with the March 12 movement, but you know, we have to address the issues which we are coming up from 1931 with the right of the people to select their representative. And we are talking about decades and decades the same political culture. So I think you can remember, I mean, if you go beyond a little bit further to March 12 movement, I mean, elections observation, I mean, I'm just coming up as example. So we had a situations where every elections was fully with violence. I think CME is by name itself came up just because of the violent situations up to 2003. So each and every elections there were at least 50 to 60 or 50 to 100 murders were there. Shooting, firearm, every elections report we observe. And we had a campaign like ballot without bullet kind of campaign. So we able to reach in certain level to control the violence as a civil society. But we realize in 2010, 2015, after these the first era, that there is no point to have elections, even if it is free and fair. I mean, if we are not in a position to bring a capable quality representative for us to represent in parliament or president or whatever the level.
You don't see Sajith Premadasa, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Andukumar Dissanayake, all these names that are coming out as a suitable representative to lead the country, Rohana.
So, I mean, if it's so, they were in the parliament, the name which you just mentioned, they were in the parliament almost 20 years now, some of them. And I mean, current parliament, if you look at them, most of them, not maybe the most actually, at least 30 to 40% people who are running the parliament at the moment, they were there more than 4 decades. If they are capable enough, whatever their positions, of course, whoever run the country, they have the main responsibility. But even if you are in the parliament as opposition party.
But being the devil's advocate here, if you look at the last few years, there seems to be somewhat of a resurrection as far as the country's economy is concerned. Now you mentioned about the parliamentarian who has been there for 4 decades. There are only 2 parliamentarians in the Sri Lankan parliament, 2 or 3, a handful, Maithripala Sirisena, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who have been prolonged without any disruptions to their parliamentary seat, who has been in parliament. So are you trying to say that you don't see any good that has happened during the last 2 to 3 years with Ranil Wickremesinghe as the president of the country?
No, I'm not saying that.
You just said that.
I'm not saying that.
You said there is no suitable candidate.
No, I'm not. I mean, you can't take in that way.
Don't worry, Rohana. You can say if you want to.
No. I'm not worried. I will say whatever I feel because I have been in this sector and I'm almost 50 plus now. So I have experience with this same political clan. So what I'm saying is they have done something. I mean, so-called development. I mean, if you look at the development per se, there are a lot compared with our childhood. That's fine. But where we are now at the moment. So without having proper economic plan, our politicians, the presidents and all our parliamentarians, they were not able to manage our economy. This is something about management. So the main responsibility of the parliamentarians, including the opposition party, to look at our finance. And they are the real people according to the constitutions. But they were not able to do that. So the head of the state is the most responsible person. So Ranil Wickremesinghe, president, he was prime minister at least 2 terms, actually 3 terms, even during the recent past. And Mahinda Rajapaksa was there for 2 terms as a prime minister, and again the 2 terms as president. So they are responsible. They have done certain development, but they were not able to manage our finance. They took a loan without having proper plan. There was no priority. They don't serious about it. They don't serious about public money. If they are serious about the public money, we may not in situations like this today. Even now, do you think that they are serious about the public money? The way they take decisions about finance, about the people. I mean, I can show you today, I got the SMS from the electricity board. I can show you if you want, that the interest per day for my light bill around 21,000 I had to pay for 2 months, because I'm not in a position to pay every month regularly. Somehow I managed to pay now 311 rupees per day interest. So if I am unable to pay 1 month, it will be 10,000. It's half of the electricity bill. This is the way they are looking at the people. They are not serious about the public. If they are serious about whether they will do that, they are not. For example, the electricity board, and they have increased our the prices every month or every quarter the last 1 year. Whether they have taken any sort of control mechanism, their expenses, the limit their expenses, we didn't see anything. So what I'm trying to say, your basic questions, so we can't change overnight this. I mean, I'm sure that you will ask, the last 10 years, it's not a overnight, last 9 years, what you have done as martial movement. Of course, we are not success, we have to accept that. But we try our level best. Even now, we are still trying, because there's no option for us.
With your 50+ years experience, Rohan, who do you think will become the Prime Minister and the President of the country?
I mean, we are not serious about the persons. We are serious about the system. Whoever coming as a leader, he or she should have a vision to the country.
But that person has to be elected by the people.
Exactly, that should be elected the people. But the person should have a vision. They should have a team. So one man can't make big difference if he doesn't have a team with him.
Right.
But I mean, you know, as a pastoral, I mean, I'm not in a position to say who is suitable for the country, but it should decide by the people. But the only thing is, to take that decisions, we have to have elections. Unfortunately, we don't have elections now.
What if all the 22 million people in Sri Lanka and the 11+ million people who are eligible to vote think on the same lines, that we don't know who the people are, but there should be a good system in the country? It's going to be very difficult, no, Rohana?
Yeah, that is true, but I mean, as a pastoral executive director, I'm not in a position to say in publicly who is a suitable person.
I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to ask you, Rohana. Don't worry. It's your personal right, and you are eligible to vote to whoever you want at a closed door ballot that will happen in Sri Lanka. I now my attention to Manjula Kajanayaka, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. Manjula, this year is going to be an election year across the world. 64 elections in the world this year. Sri Lanka is, however, in the spotlight. We are the only country in the world who does not know whether a general election is going to be held first or a presidential election is going to be held first. What will be held first, Manjula? At least tell us.
Thanks for having me for this show, actually. Shabir, I think it is a worth question. I mean, that you know that when the entire world is going to having maybe 60 odd elections, and Sri Lanka also, actually we are getting ready to whatever election is coming first, maybe the 75th election in Sri Lanka. It is a wonderful, remarkable movement for Sri Lanka, actually. I mean, conducting 75 election is a huge thing in a democratic country. Anyway, according to the constitution of Sri Lanka, actually, in Sri Lanka, if you are asking seriously which election should become first, I mean, my answer is provincial council elections, okay? Legal, according to the legality as well as the constitutionality, actually, that provincial council election should be there, then local government should be there, as well as presidential election. But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, the main thing is that, yes, we have an independent election commission. Unfortunately, they don't have vested powers vested with them to declare election as they want. That is the main point here actually. The thing is that, let's say, parliamentary election, as Ms. Rohana mentioned earlier actually, that the executive president should be published at a gazette notifying all the dates and nomination dates and the even first date of the sitting of parliament, first parliamentary sitting session. Then actually it is up to the executive president. Then presidential election, I mean that the in current moment actually, that president election can become first, because I know that we already discussed in previous occasions that during local government election they have been used more than 32 strategies to postpone local government elections. But for the presidential election, I think that they can't use such strategies. But for the parliamentary election, yes, they can use many strategies.
So there is a conspiracy theory, Manjula, that the first election that is going to be held in Sri Lanka this year is going to be a parliamentary election. The president is going to test the waters in terms of his popularity through this vote, and subsequently he will go for a presidential election. How do you view this conspiracy theory? Do you think that the first election that would be held in Sri Lanka would be a parliamentary election? There would be a hung parliament, no one would be able to gain a majority of the seats in parliament, and then subsequently there will be a presidential election?
Actually, you know that yes, there are many suspects because there are many doubts regarding that which election should become first. But as you mentioned, that can be happen, because after 2.5 years actually president can be dissolve the parliament, and the basic thing is actually he can observe the situation, he can observe some read some spy reports, as well as if he has some advantages actually he can dissolve the parliament, as well as he can call the presidential election also through election commission. That, let's say like that actually. If there are two elections in parallel same time, technically election commission will be able to conduct election. There's no problem at all, because they are capable, and actually that the procedure wise and the legal binding and everything is there. But the thing is that what you said that the hung parliament actually, that what will happen? Yes, it can be happen, because we are living under the Second Republic Constitution, which has given more powers to the executive president. Then the entire election system of Sri Lanka has a frame to strengthen executive president. That's the thing.
Thank you very much, Manjula Kajanayak, Executive Director of the Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. I now move my attention towards Piyumi Madhushani, Attorney at Law, Program Manager, Political Transparency International, Sri Lanka. Piyumi, a few weeks ago when you came on the show, your role did not read as Program Manager Political. Your title read as Legal Officer of Transparency International, Sri Lanka. How different is your role now?
Good evening, Shamil. Thank you for having me today. So actually, yes, the position has changed. Now I'm working for the political sector team of Transparency International Sri Lanka, and our main stakeholder are politicians, and we are working on different aspects relating to anti-corruption, but mainly targeting politicians.
Thank God, Piyumi. Now I can ask you a question about politics for once on the show, because last time when I asked you a question about politics, you said because you're the legal officer of Transparency International, you can't answer my question. But now I can ask you a question about politics in Sri Lanka.
Feel free to ask.
So, Piyumi, tell me, who, in your opinion, are the front runners of a possible election in Sri Lanka now?
I think we should let citizens decide it, and citizens should be having the opportunity to elect their representatives and make the informed decision. So elections need to come first, because there's a legitimate issue that people have been raising with these oppressive laws coming in, even whether the government has the legitimacy to bring all these oppressive laws while they have lost the public trust. So I think when it comes to elections, the voters need to make an informed decision this time without keep voting the corrupt. They need to make an informed decision, and they need to be looking at the principles that they follow as well. For example, is your public representative is a corrupt person? Does he or she have allegations on corruption, and whether that person has been convicted for criminal offense, and how has he or she been managing public finance so far? And so those kind of questions voters need to think of and
But you
vote
can help
smart.
us, like Transparency International Sri Lanka can help the people make that informed decision. Do you agree?
Yes,
Tim?
of course. I think as an organization, we have, as a civil society organization, we have the responsibility to help citizens to make the informed decision. So rather than telling voters whom to vote, our duty should be to guide them as to what
Let me make that question a little bit more simple for you. Let me rephrase that question for you. Just a few months ago, Sri Lanka had a revolution. There was a change of government. Ranil Wickremesinghe came as the president of the country. The Aragale took place, in other words, and people wanted a system change. Subsequently, there has been many corruption scandals in Sri Lanka. If you take a look at the sugar scam, if you take a look at the health crisis in the country, we just heard that another person from the Ministry of Health has been arrested with regard to the immunoglobulin matter in the country. So this is not what the people wanted. So do you think moving forward, the people can rely on such a government when voting at the next election?
Yes, so as you said, we have been going through a rough time as a country, going through an economic crisis, and there has been complexities in the political landscape as well. And even through IMF, these reforms that they are bringing as recommendations in exchange of financial assistance are to solve this problem. And even IMF governance diagnostic assessment accept the fact that the economic crisis and the debt crisis that we are going through are outcomes of larger issues of governance. So without addressing the problems in the governance, in the system, we cannot expect a sustainable change in the country.
So before I open the floor for questions, Piyami, just one more question for you. Are we ready for an election this year?
In terms of the constitution, the presidential election should be held around October, September. So I think people are expecting an election. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Piyami Madhusani, Program Manager, Political Transparency International Sri Lanka. As I said before, on to my immediate right is Navesh, on to my immediate left is Nadim. Nadim, with your permission, I will ask Navesh to pose the first question.
Yes, thank you, Shamir. I'd like to ask Rohan Hettiarachchi my first question. You spoke about political culture in your opening remarks, and we know that sadly our political culture is such that when an election is coming, political parties always go into giving reliefs, tax cuts, and they reduce the prices if it's a government and so on, just to make the people happy and just to get those votes. But now with the IMF in play, will the game be a little bit different this time?
No, I don't think so. Whatever the IMF said and done, the politicians will do whatever they want to win the elections. I mean, if you look at the recent circulars issued by the president and as a finance minister as well as the president, there are two circulars as issued. One is on annual budget for 2024. So we all are talking about financial crisis, and we are getting taxes and using those taxes for next month whatever the payment expenses, right? The way the government is talking about on how they are running the country in that way. But the circulars which issued by the president, as in his capacity as a finance minister, the entire 2024 annual welfare program as well as the development program, they were advised to the government officials, GAs and the divisional level government officials to complete all the tasks before 31st of July. And the second circular they issued, they have a program called Upcountry 10 years program or something like that. And even that, it's a 10 years program. Even that program for 2024, their annual budget allocation has to complete the task before 31st of July. So with this financial crisis, how they are targeting the upcoming elections, the government force is using for upcoming presidential, that is also indications that the government is preparing for presidential elections. I think they will use IMF strategy to suppress the people, but when it's come to their power game, they will not serious about that.
So Dr. Howard, that's an interesting point. Now Rohan says that IMF strategies could be used to suppress the people. Now you are an economist. Has that happened elsewhere in the world?
I'm not sure I fully understand or agree with the idea that IMF policies or strategies have been used to suppress the people. Rather, it's a consequence of implementing IMF strategies, because essentially there's a huge wealth transfer away from ordinary people towards the rich. And it's happened in every single country. And usually it goes with more and more authoritarian types of approaches. So that would be my answer there. And especially in the current context, where the policies have resulted in higher food prices, higher fuel prices, higher energy prices, 1.5 million people being cut off from electricity. Now, when you have these sorts of situations, the social pressures are going to mount. And that's when the government needs to become more authoritarian.
So Dr. Rohan, there was an interesting point that Dr. Howard says. He says that it does not suppress the people, but in other words, it may distance the people from the government as well. As such, they may lose momentum at an election.
That is true, I agree with that. But other than that, it's a kind of justification for the government. Whatever they are do on these increased taxes or whatever the areas where it's badly affect for the public, they use IMF always, and as a strategy and excuse point. And they always saying, okay, look, the country is bad. So we are the people who's trying to build the country. And look what was the situations 1 year back. So we are here now. And people also feel that, I mean, compare with the 1 year back. Now situation is much better. But people do not know whether we are getting much more loan to run the country or whether we are paying back our previous loans. People are not serious about it. I mean, maybe serious about only certain percentage of the public. But always government use this as a strategy or exit point for the public questions for the IMF. But when it's come to the elections, I mean, this is do or die for the politicians. So they wanted to continue their power. Opposition parties also, they wanted to get into power. So they use all these their strategies for the election game. So that is what the government is doing now. And they were, you can remember when it's come to the local elections, how they give an excuse for without releasing money for the elections commission.
So Rona, I want to know, can the president hold a referendum and get away from holding a presidential election?
There's no enough time frame for that. because they can, legally they can.
Because we saw this happening in 82, the parliamentary election, the Lampu Kalagedi story, you know. So can that happen?
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, yes, because if they bring the proposal to the parliament, if parliament two-thirds agreed, and then they have to go for a Supreme Court. I mean, anybody can go to the Supreme Court. And even after that, they have to go for a referendum. Then again, that means again the elections. Then people can take on the decisions on that. So it takes times, and it may be not good for the government. So,
but it can happen. It can happen.
Theoretically, yes. Practically, it's very, very, very rare. I mean, because Constitution is clearly stated that within October and September, in between, most probably it will be in first week of October, the election should take place. Only election commission also have only limitations. I mean, they can take a decision on within the month, and also there is a campaigning period for 4 to 6 weeks, and for the nomination 16 days to 21 days. So altogether 9 weeks. So election commission also have a limitations. Within that period, they have to call for the election.
It has to be done within 45 days.
Exactly. So it will be elections will declared by either end of July or first week of August. So that is why President circulars issued to complete all these the tasks before end of the July. So I think there is no window for government to play on that.
Humi, I'm going to ask the same question that Shamir asked you earlier, but in a different format, because you told Shamir that basically as a civil society organization, your responsibility is not to tell the people who to vote for, but to provide guidance on what to look for. So one of the things that I know that TISL has done is you all have provided MPs with a platform to make the asset declarations public. So far, there are 17 MPs who have done so. I was going to rattle off their names really quickly. Taraka Balasuriya, Harsha De Silva, Vimalavira Disanayaka, Vidura Vikramanayaka, M.A. Sumandiran, Vasudeva Nanayakara, Dayasiri Jayasekara, Eran Vikramaratna, Madhura Vithanage, Laxman Kiriyalla, Mr. Sivanyanam Sridharan, Susil Premajayanta, Mahinda Nandalukkamage, Buddhika Patirana, Ranjan Ramanayaka, Ali Zahid Maulana, and Ashu Marasinga. So given that these are the only 17 MPs who have made the asset declarations public, and given that you're providing guidance for the public on who to vote for, do you think that these are suitable candidates for the public to vote for?
Well, asset declaration campaign is something that we have been running for a long time.
Yeah.
And with the people's movement, it became a hot topic as well. Because to tell you why asset declarations
But what I'm asking is, do you think that this list of people that's there on the TISL website, because you said that your job is to provide guidance for the voter.
Now you have 17 names.
And there are 17 people there. So is your guidance to the voter that these people are worth voting for?
It's not the purpose, but we are giving the opportunity for the public to have a look and make the informed decision, and also keep demanding public disclosure of other asset declarations as well.
How do you view, Piyumi, that the 4 main presidential candidates whose names have now been announced, Anil Kumar Disanayaka, Sajid Premadasa, Ranil Wickramasinghe's name has not yet been announced, but those names are not in the the list, the 17.
Yes, so none of them have actually disclosed their asset declarations publicly on our platform.
So does that make them not eligible to be the president of the country?
It's not. It's just one criteria, but very important, because people can actually see whether their public representatives are illicitly enriching through their public post.
So, now this is the issue, right? Now I know that back in 2017, when the RTI Act came in, TISL tried to get then Prime Minister Ranil Wickramasinghe's asset declaration and President Maithripala Sirisena. Finally, about almost 2 years later, RTI Commission says this should be made public. Presidential Secretariat appealed against it at the Court of Appeal. What happened to that case? Is it still at the Court of Appeal?
It is still going on in the Court of Appeal, but let me also tell you the law has changed now. Previously, the asset declarations were quite secret, but now under the new anti-corruption law, a deducted version need to be publicly available, and it's one of the IMF requirement which has not been met yet.
So it's not, are you confident that it will be met?
It has to be. There's a deadline as well, because the Anti-Corruption Act itself says...
This is Sri Lanka. We violated IMF agreements on 16 times in the past. Do you think that it will be met? Are you confident?
Yeah, so according to the law, within 18 months, the full act need to be implemented, and the asset declaration electronic system is missing
The
yet.
Anti-Corruption Act was passed now almost 8 months ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Last year, yes.
About 8 months now. So 10 months to go.
Yes.
There could be a change in government. The IMF deal might be renegotiated. So I'm trying to assess the civil society's confidence in these measures being implemented.
Ideally, the public, it should be made public before elections so that voters can make an informed decision. But unfortunately, government is not seem to be prioritizing establishing the electronic system. So that's...
But they passed the Online Safety Act, and they've got a 6-month, so they gave the Anti-Corruption Act 18 months, but the Online Safety Act's rollout period is only 6 months.
Yes, so it indicates what their priorities are.
This is,
because for me, when I look at it in the pattern of things, it indicates that there's no intention of ever implementing what's in the Anti-Corruption Act.
Because this is Sri Lanka, because you see people who have been implicated with torture being appointed as IGPs. Then you have individuals who are implicated with corruption appointed as co-op committee chairmen. So anything is possible, no?
And I think that is why we should be pushing for implementation as civil society,
Yes.
like rather than just having a couple of acts being there in paper. Actual implementation is something that government need to be prioritized.
On that, actually, Manjula, I want to pick your thoughts as well. Now, finally, I mean, even though Rohan has said that, March 12th movement failed, I think we have some successes. You managed to get campaign finance regulations in. Now, that's another issue, though, that's going to come up at this election, because, as I understand it, they put a cap on how much you can spend on your campaign. The reality, though, is that for the past now couple of years, since Taragalaya and to now, we know that the political parties have been amassing massive war chests to spend on elections. Do you think that this, you already said that, look, even though the Election Commission is independent, it is in essence powerless. And we've seen examples of that in the past as well. Do you really think that the Election Commission will enforce these campaign finance regulations?
Good question, Nadeem, actually, that introduction of campaign finance law is one of kind of revolutionary step taken by Election Commission with the backing of stakeholders, including election observers. When it comes to implementation of this particular act, there are some strength, pros and cons. We should accept it. But that as an election observer, I think that we missed a golden opportunity, that local government elections. If there was an election, actually we can test at least that what will happen to this particular this specific piece of legislation. But that the election commission side, unfortunately, nature of this law, even after issuing election results, even 21 days after issuing results of the election commission can be stay in a sound sleep. Because that actually they have to do only 1 or 2 things related to this. That means after 21 days of election results, people is starting to send their reports, to a kind of, 2 kind of reports, donations and their in-kind donations and their election cost. As well as after 10 days, actually, once they received, they will put at least 3 national newspapers that we have received these reports. After that, still they can be staying calm. Okay? Then if someone like Election Observation Mission or citizen lodge in a complaint only, actually they can do something. Even after that, actually what will happen, once they receive report, actually they have to send those reports to submit B reports to Sri Lanka police. That's the way. But let me to take this as a positive matter. You know that, I mean, at least now we have a law as election observation missions and civil society organizations. At least we can see the source of income for politicians, political parties, and we can see how they have spent their money during election campaign. At least we can see such things related to this.
So you're confident that the parties will make this public and that they'll stay within the limit?
I have a confidence that they should, but you know that, let's say now that what is going on around right now. Now actually there's a huge, I mean a massive promotion program of incumbent president that provide indeed that in singular name of that is Urumaya. Okay, they are targeting 2 million people, as well as the foreign employment.
So the president has already exceeded his campaign finance budget?
Maybe, definitely. But unfortunately, actually, Sri Lanka, we don't have that political campaign finance. We do have only campaign finance. So during election time period only, we can do something related to this.
So, Dr. Nicholas, so on this...
Rohan wants to say something.
Sorry, Rohan.
So far, we do not know the limitation for presidential candidate. But if you calculate the amount which you have allocated for local elections, if you get the same amount, so it will be around 700 millions for the presidential, I mean for the party as well as the candidate both for upcoming elections. But it can be changed because the election commission will decide the amount after the nomination in consultation with the political parties. But that is the law.
But Rohan, if you're giving land deeds to 2 million people, then you would have already taken a big chunk of that 700.
That is true.
Right?
I mean, that is, it's going from the government budget. No, they will not take it as their expenses.
Exactly my point. So, Dr. Nicholas, you mentioned that, you know, look, under the IMF conditions was on the budget deficit and then the Central Bank Act as well, that there's restrictions on how the government can spend. So, with the upcoming election, do you feel that realistically the government can sort of dole out things to the public while remaining within the IMF's targets on expenditure and revenue?
No, I don't feel that. I think they can't do both. I think what they're trying to do is do a limited number of things to regain some popularity. Because basically, when you allow food prices to get out of control, energy prices and fuel prices, then your political standing is at a very low ebb. Now, what I think, though, is they're trying very hard on the propaganda front to show that their policies are working. So what I've noticed, reading the newspapers, I hear all the time, tourism is up, remittances are up. I read another newspaper, tourism is up, remittances are up. But actually, if you look at the most important things, industrial production, export growth, loan growth, they're all down. And loan growth, really important, because you remember what I said earlier, that the banks are actually buying treasury bills. Loan growth is negative, or was negative last year. And
when you say loan growth, you're talking about credit for business.
To individuals and credit to firm.
Yeah.
Negative. In real terms, in 2023, it was minus 20%. Is one of the lowest in our history. Nobody is advertising this. Now, for me, it's not just the IMF policies, but it's what is underlying the IMF policies, which is anti-industrialization policies. I'll just give a case in point. Today, someone sent me a new ordinance from the government. That ordinance states that there will be no longer preferential treatment for Sri Lankan companies in government procurement. So when the government has to buy things, usually it buys from Sri Lankan companies. Now that is, all countries have done that. That's how we support industry and the growth of the economy. Now for the first time we have an ordinance where they say this hasn't been working in Sri Lanka, therefore we're scrapping it. Actually, that's not true. It has been working in Sri Lanka. There are lots and lots of cases. The reason they're doing this is because it's a requirement of FTAs. And this means to say we're going to be seriously hamstrung in the future with not just the conditions coming out of the IMF package, but the conditions coming out of the things that we've been advised to do, like signing FTAs, without really understanding the full implications of what we're doing, the damage.
So, Dr. Howard, I recollect you have been very vocal of the fact that the current government should have negotiated better the IMF conditions and done something differently. And you've been a very strong advocate on this premise for a very long time. Do you think if the status quo changes in Sri Lanka, hypothetically, at an election, that Sri Lanka has the opportunity to renegotiate the conditions with the IMF?
I think they would only have that opportunity if they find other alternative sources of finance. And by that I mean bilaterals. Now, every time I mention this, people ridicule it, and they say, no, which countries are going to come in and rescue us? Well, you just have to look at sub-Saharan Africa. Don't forget, 82 other countries were in the same predicament we were, not exactly having zero foreign exchange, but having to go to the IMF.
Dr. Nicholas, I don't understand. So are you trying to say, let me get this straight, are you trying to say that we have to get more debt from bilateral countries?
No. Actually, what I'm arguing and what I've been arguing...
you said alternative source of finance, and then you said people ridicule you because you always advocate that we have to get bilateral funds. So bilateral funds coming in what nature?
Exactly. So let me just give the case of Uganda. Uganda needed 7 billion. And they got 5 billion by entering into a deal with China to build a railway line. And this was very important because this particular railway line was actually going to improve productivity massively in Uganda. That was the first thing they did. The second thing they did is they entered into another 2 billion contract for producing spare parts for the auto industry. Now, there are things like that that we could do, so and at least have it as an
Don't
option.
you think, Dr. Nicholas, we have done things like that? Example, the Hambantota port that was constructed with $1.1 billion, then the Lotus Tower that was constructed with the Chinese funds, the Hambantota International Convention Center that was built with Chinese funds. We've done this, and we are in this rut today because those projects did not yield benefits. And
no, sorry, Shami, let me correct you on that.
Please do.
We are in this mess because under Mr. Wickremesinghe, when he was Prime Minister, the governor of the central bank then went and borrowed 9 billion in ISBs, 4.4 billion in the last year, that's 2018. That's why we're in this mess. When you borrow this magnitude of money in such a short space of time, because it was only in 3.5 years, there's no chance of you repaying that.
But you know that the ISP, we entered into ISP debt in 2008 with the then Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral at the helm. So don't you think everyone is responsible? Not
everyone.
Just Ranil Wickremesinghe. It's
everyone
Mahinda Rajapaksa's administration. It's Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaraswamy government. It is Ranil Wickremesinghe administration, which was led by Maithripala Sirisena. All of these people are responsible. Is it fair to point the finger at one political party or one person and say, he is the one who is responsible and that is why we are in this mess?
Yes, absolutely. Because until Mr. Wickremesinghe assumed the prime ministership, the total outstanding ISPs were 5 to 6 billion. After he came, we added 12 billion. Now, when you add 12 billion like that in such a short space of time, you of course lose your credit ranking. Of course you do. Because how is Sri Lanka, when anyway we were having trade imbalances, how is Sri Lanka going to repay all of this? And the only question I ask is, why did this happen? Why was this done?
Right. So, my next question to you is, Dr. Nicholas, you always say that it's important to negotiate your dealings with the IMF very well. We saw a recent politician from a very renowned political party, I don't want to mention his name or the political party, saying that if they come into power, they will stop paying the ISP holders. They won't pay them. They will just forget about them. Can that be done?
I don't think so. I think what you can expect from, let's say, a political party that was more serious about foreign debt restructuring is that they will impose a haircut in a more stringent manner than the current government seems to be imposing.
Right. So, Rohana, I'm getting a lot of questions, so I'm trying to momentarily pose those questions to all the panelists. So, let me pose a question to Rohana. How does the Election Commission plan to deal with persons campaigning during the electoral silence period? Even though we see traditional media bowing down to regulations, it's almost impossible to regulate ads on FB, Instagram and satellite TV, given that they fall outside the jurisdiction.
So what is your question on that?
So how do you regulate ads on FB, Instagram, satellite TV, because they fall outside the jurisdiction because of the fact when there is an electoral silence period? How does the government intend to do that? The Elections Commission per se, what's their role?
Well, I have two answers for that. I think the first answer with the issue is basically the financial allocation for the Elections Commissions. The Elections Commission was asking about around 11 billion for the elections. I mean, it's strongly quoted as 10 billion, but the government has already announced that they are giving 10 billion anyway. But with the upcoming elections, the Election Commission has to look at the campaign finance which is going to be implemented in the first elections. But and also, as you said, that the social media, the lot of advertisement coming up with the social media, and there will be hate speech, misinformation, disinformation in a big way. So if Elections Commissions unable to recruit the IT expert into their department, because they do have, generally they are good in administration, the rest of the things, but I think across Asia, I mean, in my experience, except a couple of countries, they are not occupied with the IT. So they have to have extra resources to overcome these situations, to appoint the new IT sector for the Elections Commissions, and also is separate unit for campaign finance also. So if the government is limiting the funds, so Election Commission has to look at only on the basic administrations things, the printing the ballot papers, establish the polling stations, and the counting and the basic election process. They have to follow. That's one thing. The second thing, I don't think that we should control the social media. But only thing is, the Election Commission has to have a system to monitor the social media, and if they are coming up with the wrong messages, misinformation, disinformation, we have to have a system to control that. I think the last elections we have done in collectively with some of the civil society other groups, PAFRL and CME also part of it, #generations, with the Elections Commission. we call it trustworthy partnership. The trustworthy means that we have been working with the Elections Commission almost 4 decades. So whenever we send some informations, issues, so they take actions immediately.
So Rohan, now you said earlier that you can't see a proper representative right now to be elected as the president or the prime minister of the country. If that's the case, should the executive president be from the civil society?
I don't think so.
Not even civil society?
No, I don't think so. We have a bad experience very recently, recent past. I mean, that doesn't mean that civil society doesn't have a capable persons, but the politics is little difference, right? So we have to have experienced persons on politics, and we have to have it can be either civil society, it can be either academic or any other sectors, but we need to have a visionary leadership for the country. So
you said experience.
So then it's going to be the same pack of cards we keep pulling if you're talking about experience.
That is because why we are talking in that way, because we have a bad experience with existing politicians, right? That doesn't mean that the new persons coming from the civil society are capable enough to run the country. The same with Gotabaya Rajapaksa. We thought that he is the miracle. He will make.
Maybe you thought.
No. I mean the public. So that is why the 69 million voted for him. So we know what was the end result, right? So we should have we should take very careful decisions on upcoming elections, not just looking at the persons. Of course, we have to, end of the day, the candidate will be one individual, but we have to look at the overall system. And we need to check, we need to see what kind of policies they are coming with.
If you look at it, the recent past, I know PAFREL has been working very closely with UNP-led governments a lot because to promote democracy and all that and more. But now when you see online safety bills coming into play, now they're discussing about an NGO bill that has to come into play as well in the next few weeks. What is your thinking about this, the UNP led by Ranil Wickremesinghe?
I think I should make your questions clear. We have not.
No, my questions are clear.
Right? Your questions are clear, but giving a wrong interpretation, right?
I don't know that.
No, I mean, that's my position.
Right.
So we have been working with all the governments, no matter whether it's a UNP or a SJB or a SLPP or whatever, whoever running the country, we are closely working with the governors and electoral reforms, even with the UNP government, even with Mahinda Rajapaksa's government. We have been working on that. But I think my experience with President, when he was in the opposition party, because he was in the opposition, I think, almost decades, only few occasions he was be able to take the position.
No, don't rub that in, Rohan.
So those period, he was quite democratic man, and not specifically working with.
But now
we don't see that. We don't see that. The suppressive laws, which is, you don't think that it's coming up without his knowledge? I don't think so. So he's coming up various laws.
So he's not the opposite.
You say he was a democratic man, but really, if you look at his, let's say, governance track record, especially within the party itself, from like doesn't look very democratic.
I
so maybe that
you.
was the hint of how he runs the party. This is how he's going to be running government as well.
I totally agree with you. But I totally agree with you. But the impression he has given to the country and the impression he has given to the international world, he is more democratic and more how do you call more open kind of person, right?
Yeah.
So that is the impression. That's the impression he has given.
And he's managing to give that impression without having elections.
Sorry?
He's managing to give that impression without having elections.
That is how we play with the international community also. That is, he's darling for the West, I think.
So people, Nadeem, if you don't mind, just one question on a question that you posed before. Now, Nadeem posed a question about the 17 individuals who have made the asset declaration public. So the question is, do you think that all the 17 persons who have submitted their declarations of assets are honest?
So when these were made public, there was no system of verification. And that was a serious question that has been raised by public as well, because these are publicly available, but who knows whether this is the truth or not. And the law itself did not require verification. But now with the new powers given to the Bribery Commission, they have the capacity and power to verify, to check with different other public institutions. Could be land registry, it could be Inland Revenue Department. So they can do cross-checking and do verification.
But Pumi, the Bribery Commission has had, even before the new Anti-Corruption Act, they had a dedicated asset declaration investigation unit. And other than for taking a couple of MPs to court and getting a 1,000 or 2,000 rupee fine, I don't think that unit has ever done any actual verification of whether the information in there was true or not.
I agree with you.
Do they have the capacity now? So they've been given 18 months to develop this capacity. So there, eight of the 18 months are gone. I know that you all must be in touch with officials at the Bribery Commission. Do you see them making any progress in developing this capacity?
So far, the implementation has not been satisfactory, and there's a role of government as well to, when you make these commissions independent and give them a lot of powers, there's a duty in terms of the government as well to give enough resources, human resources, financial resources, and also to build their capacity to do this job, because we see a lot
but
of...
the thing is, you know, I actually studied this, and I will send you that article if I can, but I found that the Bribery Commission, they are underspending on the money that's allocated for them already. So it's not like the government is not giving them resources. I looked as far back as between 2015 and 2020, actually it was 5 years of Yahapalnya. The government was allocating money, but the commission was underspending.
Najib, can I add something into it? So I have sent RTA applications to the Bribery Commission asking how many cases they have received from 2022 January up to 2023 September. How many cases they have received, how many cases they have followed, what are the actions they have taken. There are a couple of other questions. And it's almost 2 years actually, 20 months, roughly about 21 months. They have replied back and said they have received 4,415 cases they have received during this period, right?
Yeah.
Almost 2 years, nearly 2 years. And how many cases they have filed based on that complaints? Only 2 for 2 years. Out of 4,415 cases. Maybe if let's say 50% are not clear, there's no evidence to process, but for the 2 years, only 2 cases. Because the entire country, we are talking about corruptions. The last decades, even at the moment, we are talking about the main issue which we are talking about, the corruptions. The main institutions established by the government is this Bribery Commission. This is the reality. So they are not responsible.
So this is the problem right now. As a taxpayer, for me, I'm like, because you're saying from the side of civil society, you're saying these guys, they don't have resources, they need more funds. But when I actually go and look at what the government has allocated for them and what they're actually spending on, turns out maybe what the government is allocating is not enough, but they're not even spending that.
Yeah, and
so I'm like, it feels like it's not a issue of them being under-resourced or understaffed, it's an issue of them lacking the will.
yes, it's about willpower as well, and now it's a high time because there's a new leadership as well. So when you go to the website of them, you see a lot of bribery cases, but how about the white-collar criminals? The grand corruption happening in Sri Lanka. So I think the leadership really needs to think whether they are addressing the big problem of corruption in the country. And it relates to the public trust as well. As you say, people have lost trust in the system and Bribery Commission, and in order to gain that back, they really need to address the grand corruption issue in the country as well.
So Manjula, if you look at what's happening right now, it seems that the government has suddenly got money. Now, if you look at it, We saw in 2022 August, the government increased electricity tariffs by 264%.
Yeah.
And then they reduced it just a couple of weeks ago by 22%.
Yeah.
And now people are happy
Yeah,
that
so happy.
they have reduced the prices. And the profit that the CEB made last year is 65 billion
Yes.
rupees.
Yeah.
Now, people are happy. It seems like the government has been able to pull a rabbit out of the hat. But do you think that this is the reality? This is a ground reality, or is this them thinking that the people are dumb?
I think it is. I mean, it is not a new thing or strange thing. No, that is something actually they have been tested almost last 15 years up to now. The problem is that actually, you know, that last time, I mean, something happened like this. There were people to raise this, as well as organizations, civil society, actors, many people. Now they're shrinking the space of civil society also in one side. Other side is that actually draconian laws. Due to that actually that they have been able to shut the mouth of some people, and at least actually that they have given some signals that warning to be silent on these cases like that. And we know that how that they appointed the IGP, and as well as that actually the behavior of the Speaker of the Parliament and like that actually they are very open actually that violating the constitution of the country. That is transpired into citizens also, that is the way. But you know that it is a simple way that they know that people, as you mentioned actually, that it is very easy to do things like that. I mean,
so Manjula, how much of money has been allocated this year for the elections in the 2024 budget? It's only 10 billion,
yeah,
right?
It is 10 billion. You know that the election commission, usually the tradition is of election commission is asking money for the scheduled election only. For the 2024, the scheduled election is presidential election. Therefore, actually, they have asked actually that only 10 billion rupees for this election.
So how much of money is spent on an election averagely?
Averagely, that last time, you know that the last presidential election, they have been spent nearly 5,800 million.
So that's about
7.2 million rupees.
Yeah, so 7.2 billion. Now,
million. 5,720.
5.8 billion.
5.72.
5.72 billion.
Billion.
Right. So it seems that this 10 billion is going to be sufficient to have 2 elections this year.
Not 2 elections actually. Actually, this is only for 1 election. If there's any other election, it is the responsibility of the government, especially executive president. You know, according to the constitution, it is the responsibility of the executive president to support election commission to conduct the free and fair elections. It is a constitutional conditions provision. Then, if there's 2 elections, they have to allocate 20 billion rupees.
Singh had already told that this is going to be election year. After the presidential election, a general election will follow. That's what he had told.
Agree. Not only that, Shamit, the dangerous thing is actually that our cabinet has convened their meeting on 5th February. Accordingly, actually, that I saw the cabinet memorandum, that not memorandum, the meeting minutes, cabinet meeting minutes. Accordingly, they are telling 2 things. The first thing is that they are advising to election commission to cut their election budget from 20 billion to 10 billion. That means cabinet is saying that election commission needs 20 billion rupees for 2 elections, but as cabinet we can allocate only 10 billion. Then you can't do election in that way.
Yeah.
The 10 billion, I mean, compared with 2019 elections, 10 billion is not a big sum. Because, I mean, if you recall the local elections also, they asked 10 billion, right? Because 2019 and now 2024, within these 5 years, we know how the cost escalations, right? So, but 10 billion is not sufficient. But if we go for a parliamentary elections immediately after the presidential elections, in the previous experience, they can take the money from emergency fund. So, whenever the elections calls, the elections commission, I mean, the parliamentary election can dissolve after any time after 2.5 years. Even Parliament by themselves they can dissolve, right? In such a situations, Election Commission has to proceed with the elections. So they can use the emergency fund, but that also under the government. There is no financial independency on Sri Lankan Election Commission.
So what I want to understand is, Rohana, now Manjula said that the Election Commission has to require the funds.
Yeah.
Now, a provincial council election has not been held for years. A local government election was supposed to be held. Now, a presidential election is supposed to be held this year as well. The general election, of course, not this year. So, in that event, the government, the Elections Commission has to request money for 3 elections. Don't you think?
Of course, they have to request for the presidential elections and local elections at this year, because it can I mean, the local elections also already on now.
Yeah.
It has not postponed actually. It's on because ballot papers printed in halfway through and the nomination was called. So local elections are in place now. So they should be ready for the local elections and the presidential elections for sure. But Parliament, the provincial elections, there are some legal changes. It's the government has to make that. It has to go to the Parliament again. So Election Commission doesn't have authority.
But the local government election and
presidential elections, definitely they need to prepare for both elections.
Right.
Actually, whatever the money they are asking, I'm a little wonder why they are not looking at the local elections also, because the main issue with the money, I mean, there are 2-3 cases are pending at the Supreme Court, but those are supportive. Except one case, those are supportive. Those even pastoral cases, 2 cases, we are asking the elections. So at any given time, if the Elections Commission start the process, we can withdraw the cases. Other political parties also, they withdraw the cases. So the Elections Commission need to prepare for the both elections, local elections as well as the presidential elections.
So Dr. Nicholas, do you think that Ranil Wickremesinghe as the president of the country, as a minister of finance, is doing a good job with the country's economy?
I have to say no. And I have to point...
And why? And why is that?
I was going to say, I have to point the finger at one thing. And this is something that I've stressed. If a new government comes in, or if Mr. Wickremesinghe comes back, they have to amend the Central Bank Act. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm going on record predicting there will be a banking crisis, if not. And the reason there's going to be a banking crisis is because government debt is being accumulated by commercial banks without formally any recognition that now that debt is no longer risk-free. It's actually risky, because if we go into a global recession or if there's a shock to the system, there's nothing any president or any government can do to stop there being a major budget deficit. And if there is a budget deficit, then the government has to finance it from the commercial banks. At a certain point, they won't be able to repay the commercial banks. And then we will have a really massive domestic debt crisis. Now, one thing that I'm absolutely sure of is under the Basel II Accords, we weight the riskiness of commercial bank assets. And that's how we get capital adequacy. I'm absolutely sure there's no provision for the riskiness of government debt.
But Dr. Nicholas, now the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration is saying that the central bank, which was political before, is now apolitical. They're independent, and you have a difference of opinion clearly.
No, I'm actually saying something else, Shamir. I'm not even talking about independence or non-independence.
Right.
I'm actually talking about a provision in the Central Bank Act that prevents them from financing either directly or indirectly the budget deficit. And it is that that creates the problem. I know there's a discussion about the independence of the central bank and so on because of the salary increments. It's a separate matter. What I'm actually getting at is this one very important provision Because if we do have a domestic banking crisis, it's going to be very, very serious. It's going to be serious in a number of respects, and it's actually going to undo any type of positive developments there would have been.
So based on what you're saying, Dr. Nicholas, I'm trying to fathom that I'm trying to come into a conclusion that if the situation aggravates further, we may default again in a couple of years.
Yes, that from my perspective, I would see us defaulting again. And the reason is that we are not developing our industrial base, our export-oriented industrial base, and our import-substituting industrial base. So basically, what's going to happen, especially with all the free trade agreements, is foreign companies are going to be actually shooting fish in a barrel, in effect, in the Sri Lankan
Dr. Nicholas,
economy.
you say that the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration has not done well in terms of the country's economy, but look at where the US dollar against the rupee is. A few weeks ago, it was trading at 324 against the US dollar. Today it's trading at 301. So we are seeing some good signals as far as imports are concerned. Or do you think that the government is still putting a cap or a ceiling on the USD against the rupee value?
No, they don't have to put a ceiling. It's actually a normal thing for all developing countries, if they don't interfere in the market, to have overvalued currency. The fundamental reason is we allow capital inflows, but we don't allow capital outflows. And for many developing countries like Sri Lanka, we rely a lot on private remittances that have nothing to do with the production base of the economy. Therefore, again, it pushes up the value of the currency without us actually having earned it in any way. It's just simply that we have a lot of people who we send to the Middle East, and they remit money back to Sri Lanka. So there's a natural overvaluation always built in, and that's why the central bank typically calculates what is called the real effective exchange rate. So is this artificial? Is that what you're trying to say? Well, actually, we recently wrote an article in which we made some computations. If I compare the Sri Lankan rupee against the Indian rupee, currently the Sri Lankan rupee is 60% more expensive than the Indian rupee, 60%. This means to say, if a Sri Lankan producer wants to compete with an Indian producer, they have to try and reduce their costs by 60% in order to be competitive. With Thailand and with Pakistan, so we also have free trade agreements with them, the computation is over 40%. Now, usually what happens is central banks interfere in the foreign exchange market and make sure that that overvaluation is reduced. However, and this has been a major point of discussion, people say, are you advocating 60% depreciation of the currency? Absolutely not. I'm actually advocating no depreciation of the currency until we develop our industrial base, until we develop the competitiveness of the economy.
Because the Sri Lankan rupee, a couple of years ago, from the worst performing currency in Asia, went to the best performing currency in Asia as well, Dr. Nicholas. So I just have the report in front of me.
No, the report is wrong, because even at the moment we depreciated massively, 80%, the currency was still overvalued, and significantly overvalued. And unfortunately, we use IMF formula for calculating the overvaluation or undervaluation. In a nutshell, what we do is we calculate the overvaluation or undervaluation in a way that gives the impression that the US is our major competitor and not India. So the US has a very heavy weighting in that calculation. And this is a mistake.
So, just putting into perspective, this being an election year and the Single and Hindu New Year coming around the corner, isn't it a good move by the government to strengthen the country's currency a bit more so they give the benefit to the people, and as such, based on the conspiracy that I spoke before, call for election subsequently?
Actually, lots of populist governments do that. Lots. But then, what happens after the election? This is your problem. What happens after? Because what you're doing is you're worsening the competitive situation of business. And at some point, if you want to avoid that currency crisis that we were speaking of earlier, you have to do something. And it makes it much, much more difficult once you have further overvalued for populist reasons.
Right.
A good example, I might tell you, is Argentina. So Argentina had a decade where they overvalued the currency by fixing it to the dollar. Then, because that damaged industry so much and created a lot of unemployment in Argentina, the Peronistas came back. This is the more social democratic government. They came back, and what they did was carry out populist policies which neglected industry. So we got a vicious cycle going where actually everybody neglected industry. And now you've got a situation in Argentina where basically the electorate is fed up with everyone, and they bring into power someone who, in my humble opinion, is not actually a person who is entirely all there. I mean, he says some absolutely insane things, and he's doing lots of insane things. But this is what you get when you allow your system to actually disintegrate.
Are you trying to say, Dr. Nicholas, that following an election this year, there'll be, whoever is president will do a lot of insane things in the country?
No. I think what you're trying to say is institutional insanity breeds insanity.
Those are not my
There's
words.
plenty of institutional insanity in Sri Lanka.
Is that what you're trying to say?
No. I'm worried that we're moving down the Argentinian path. This is really what I'm worried about.
Right. So I have a question for Rohana and Piyumi. Sri Lanka has failed to meet 33% of IMF commitments due by end February, according to Verity research. These include commitments related to publishing information transparency and those that require the passage of governance, improving legislation. How does the government plan to address these issues? So let's start with PME.
Yeah, so then the question also comes, the government is still getting the money without meeting certain conditions, and that's how. So it seems the government is getting waivers, are giving reasons, and technically so that IMF can still grant funds. And when it comes to the recommendations that were not met, proper implementation of Anti-Corruption Act, one of those, and also publishing information relating to tax exemptions is one, and also the audit reports on state-owned enterprises is another one that's missing. So government has failed to meet certain recommendations, conditions that were imposed by the IMF.
So you said, Piyumi, that your role is to make sure the people make informed decisions. Am I right, or Piyumi,
You are.
am I right?
You are.
I am right. So Piyumi, in that case, Dr. Howard Nicholas spoke about the recent increments that were given to the central bank officials. How do you view this?
So in terms of IMF, we never say that money should not be given to the government, but what we are saying is the conditions that are given need to be...
Ethically and morally, there's no question about everyone needs a 70% increment right now given the current cost of living in the country. There's no question about that. But saying that there is brain drain happening with regard to economists and only compensating them and not compensating people who are in the health sector, who are professionals, who are working in in the professional sector. Is that fair?
So one of the reasons I think given was they are trying to make the central bank more independent as well through giving these high remunerations as well. But the question is, when you are making an institution independent, which is having a bad history of a bond scam as well, are you also placing other mechanisms such as zero tolerance policy for anti-corruption? So those kind of measures, strict measures, need also to be there in place if you are giving such institution that is having a lot of power over public funds. So that also need to be made sure at the same time, I think.
So, so I want to ask the four of you as far as what's the way forward. But before that, I just want to ask Navesh, do you have any questions from the panelists?
Yeah, I'd like to ask one from Manjula. You spoke of different commissions like the Election Commission and so on. We've seen that over the past few years there have been so many commissions that have been appointed, but you represent the Institute for Democratic Reforms. Do we see democracy within those commissions? I mean, can any of them take independent decisions without being influenced? We've seen in the recent past there were so many people who gave up on their positions because of influence, political influence and so on. So where is the democracy even within those little commissions?
Yeah, very difficult, critical questions, but my answer is that, I also not positive on that matter. That matter, I also have some observations regarding that. You know that when commission introduced in 2015, we had a golden opportunity to create a new country, new political culture, as well as create new mechanism. That's why actually as civil society organizations and including election observation missions, actually we were backing for that. But unfortunately, not only commissions, even constitutional councils. If you can see the saga, what happened when IGP, the voting of the selecting the IGP, actually some of civil society, some of constitutional council members who is representing maybe academia or civil society, actually they were absent at that time. Actually, we have to think twice what they have done, because we had a great expectation on them, not commissions actually. They are the people who is selecting commissions, as well as the commissions. You know that according to as an election observer as well as civil society activist, my observation is actually they have not done what we expected. Even right now, let's say election commission. Now, according to the election law, still we are in a election campaign mode, because still local government election is on. No one says that no local government elections, no, because that nomination has been taken, and the even election that we are considering that all the 85,000 people are candidates right now.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court has also ordered that the election must be held.
Yeah,
right?
but that unfortunately, election commission perspective that they are not coming front. That and actually they are not telling proactively that at least this is election this is election time, or what has been not done, or what should be done. Actually, they are not telling anything. As well as actually that critical matter, let's say elections. Now people are in dark, that whether which election is coming first, like that. What the hell, why election commission can't tell it in public?
So are you saying that the election commission also has failed the people just like the politicians have?
I'm thinking as an election observer, I'm thinking so, like that.
I think if I come on these questions, I think the commissions which we are talking about, the system, is really good. Actually, we had a good hopes on when we introduced the system, rather than having individuals running in the Elections Commission and other institutions.
Are you talking about when the 17th Amendment was introduced, or 19th?
19th.
I mean, even 17th, actually, with the 17th, we didn't have Elections Commissions. But the system itself, it's fine. But it depends on the individuals and their personality also. And also, when it comes to the head of the state, if he or she is not work in a respectable manner, so some institutions may not in a position to do their job properly. So we are in such a situation in Sri Lanka. And I can come with example from the fourth largest democracy in the world is Indonesian elections. There is such a nice election management system. They have elections commissions. They have overlook the elections commission decisions. There is a system called Bawaslu, other elections commissions. And to overlook the both commissions, they have an ethics committee. The system is very check and balance. But at the end of the day, in Indonesian president, he himself involved the elections and his son was contesting. And they spent 74 trillion money for the elections. Elections Commission was unable to do anything. But the system is fine. The same here. I mean, according to the 19th Amendment or rather 17th Amendment, we in a sense in Sri Lanka, introduced this such a nice system. The practice is completely different just because of the people who are heading the commission as well as the appointing people and the head of the states. So it's all depends on
basically, Mr. Ettiarachchi, in a nutshell, although the people in Aragalaya and even after that, people have been protesting, asking for the faces of politicians to be changed. It's all none of it is going to change unless you can change these bureaucrats.
Of course, I mean the question you just posed to both of them about the central bank things. So they are not responsible for this economic crisis over decades. They were there, the same people. Either they individually responsible or collectively responsible. Even the government officials. I mean, look with the simple example which I brought up on bribery commissions. And I can bring the other example for them from the bribery commission. I have asked the similar questions in 2019 also. I asked how many cases you have filed during the given period, how many you have withdrawn. They said they have filed 46 cases, withdrawn 29 cases again in the same ground. So, utilizing the public money for filing cases as well as withdrawing. So, this is not only the politicians, the bureaucrats, government officers. Actually, at the end of the day, you and me also responsible.
If you remember, Nadeem, actually during the last time that when nomination time period, one of election commission female members actually resigned as a strategy to postpone the election. Soon after the incumbent president, she actually already appointed as the governor to Northern Province. That is actually it is kind of mirror that we can understand the kind of nature of members who are appointed to those commissions. That is the situation.
Right then, yes. Any thoughts before I move on to the final round?
No, I'm just trying to say the bureaucracy. I mean, if you look at the other side of that, whether you can be a divisional secretary without blessing of local politicians, whether you can be in charge of the police stations without blessing of politicians. So this is the situation. I mean, we have to address the whole thing. I mean, we can't just say that, okay, the politicians are responsible, the bureaucrats are responsible. I think we have to address the whole thing together. I don't know how soon, how far it takes, but without addressing the whole sector.
How practical?
Huh?
How practical is it to address the whole thing?
Yeah, no, we have to demand ourselves. How many decades you've been pressing the people, politicians, educate the people as a Sirasa?
Yeah.
How long you have been doing that?
Actually,
how long we have been doing that? So it takes years and years. I will tell you the last example. So compulsory identifications document for voting. I think you all know that until 2006, even when the presidential candidate when he go to polling station, someone has cast their vote, right? So this issue came up in 1954 to compulsory some sort of identifications document, and later it came in 2003, the present Prime Minister's electoral subcommittee report. So, but it implemented after 2006. It took more than 50 years to make that happen. So this is I mean, we can't wait until such a long period. But if we work together, if we make our demand, if you keep our demand continuously to the public, to the politicians, to the government, so I think we can make it. It takes little time.
How long, Rohan?
I mean, it
Little
depends.
time. What is
It,
little time?
it depends. It depends how,
All I've done
how
it for
we
the
are
last
working
2 decades.
together.
How long will it take? Are we at least, can we see some light end of the tunnel?
No, I think we have experience now, as I mentioned earlier, about this violence. If you look at it 1980s, 1990s, we have changed that. We have changed that. We are success on that. So this also, the political culture also maybe take a couple of years, but we have to work together for that, of course.
So what is the way forward? What must we do? And what is the role of the public? So let's start off with Manjula first.
Yes, my simple answer is that, you know that the answer is not simple, but my statement is that it is the normal, usual tradition of Sri Lanka that people are changing their mind during the election campaign period. Before that, actually, they are fighters, rebel fighters, like real citizens. But when it comes to election time period, actually, if they are receiving something, they will change their mindset. As well as, actually, you know that the few decades, maybe a few years ago, we had an idea that the international community also will protect us, as well as in terms of elections, that actually they may be pro-democratic and support for citizens also. You know that during the saga of local government elections, what has happened to the local government election now proved, and we observed that election commission nothing to do with elections, and also actually they have visited interested in economic fronts, and they are not working on elections most of times. Then people are helpless in that way. Then my answer is that for that, actually, that there should be election. Some say that it is also wasting money, but you know, as a democratic country, we should have elections. At least if we can't change the system, at least we should change rulers, at least, because then we should have elections. Then people can say what they can do. Actually, people can do something if there's an election.
Thank you very much, Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director of Institute for Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. I now move my attention towards P. Madhushani, a Program Manager, Political Transparency International, Sri Lanka.
Yeah, so I think, like it or not, we are in a reform moment, and given that this can be an election year, reform agenda is something that any political party or any political candidate can avoid. So even during these hardest times, people have been very hopeful of a system change, and that cannot be achieved without having governance reforms that are in line with the basic principles of democracy, good governance, as well as rule of law. And as civil society, we are watchful in terms of elections, what the plans of political candidates and political parties are. So what is it could be even their election manifestos and their plans after taking leadership. So what is their plan in terms of addressing the issue of grand corruption, what they are going to do with white-collar criminals, and how they are going to recover stolen assets, how they are going to have the asset declaration system in public, and how well are they going to manage public finance, and also to have transparency in public procurement and other systems. So these are the questions that election candidates and parties need to be addressing, and that is the message that we are bringing to the grassroots level as well.
Thank you very much, P. Madhushani, Program Manager, Political, TISL. I now move my attention towards Rohan Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of PAFREL.
I think my final remarks and my positions is still same. we need to keep the demand. So I think Dr. Nicholas may agree with me. I think demand and supply is always. So in economic sector as well as the political sector also, we need to keep our demand continuously until we make such change. And also we need to question the politicians. We need to question the bureaucrats if they are doing something wrong. And also we need to look at our politicians on their track record, what they have done. As I mentioned earlier, at least 30-40 parliamentarians, they were there in parliament almost 3 decades. Some of them are more than 40 years. So we need to look at them. I mean, if you look at these people, we are the one who, politicians, we are the one who elect them every 5 years period. So before next election, we need to look at our politicians, what is their track record, what they have done for us, whether they did their job properly. And also we need to look at what kind of elections which we are going to face, and what is their role. It's different from the president, it's different from the parliament, and also it's significantly different for the local elections. And we may face any of these elections in this year. It can be local election, it can be parliamentary election, it can be presidential election. We are sure that the presidential elections, they can't change. But people need to look at whatever the elections, what kind of persons which we are going to elect as our representative. What is the role of them? It's different from the parliament, it's different from the local elections. And also, I think as a civil society, as a media, we need to support the voters to take the informed decisions which you always referred. So informed decisions, to take the informed decisions, they need informations. I think that is our duty as a civil society as well as the media. So we need to look at the system, and we need to get the information, and we need to analyze this. I think I'm happy Sirasa always doing that. I saw nice analysis on Sri Lanka very recently. So we need to bring that kind of information for public to take their informed decisions. I think that is why your initial question about martial movement, we are planning to have a quite big event on 28th of March to targeting the public and targeting the politicians to keep our demand continuously to change the system.
Let's chase all of them away, Rohan.
I don't think so, but we'll try, yes.
We'll try. Why not? Let's be optimistic. Dr. Howard Nicholas, economist.
Thank you. Yeah, I've actually learned a lot from this discussion. It's areas that I normally don't read very much about, so it's really, yes. And something you just said also, I think I'd like to echo is this thinking about issues and discussing these issues and being transparent about it, especially in economics. The thing that has depressed me in recent times, actually more than recent times, is that we don't take lots of issues seriously in terms of discussing the policy and economic implications. Let me just give an example. If I talk to business people and I say, actually, we shouldn't really privatize energy. Oh, you're crazy. You know, those people in that CEB are all corrupt and this is so inefficient and so on and so forth. They don't actually none of them study the history of privatization in other countries. None of them. There's no informed discussion. This didn't used to happen 30 years ago. People didn't just say things without having some backing. If we look at the UK and their experience with privatization, it's been an unmitigated disaster. An unmitigated disaster. Nobody denies it anymore. Nobody denies it. But we don't look at those experiences. We talk about signing FTAs. Has anyone actually studied these FTAs in any great detail? Do we even know the implications of any of those FTAs? Does anyone discuss that and analyze it? No, we just sign. This is good to do, it's free market stuff, etc. I've got news for you. The IMF, in its most recent Finance and Development magazine, has admitted they got it wrong. Shall I repeat that? The IMF, in its most recent Finance and Development magazine, has admitted they've got it wrong. And they've asked a group of famous academics who are critics of them to come and write articles, including a Nobel Prize winner. There you have, in the IMF's own magazine, all of these people saying what is wrong with the IMF. Have we said what is wrong with the IMF? No, we blindly go and sign agreements with them. And they actually impose all these conditions, which now they're starting to accept are founded on an incorrect thinking. And so much so, we've heard of the famous economist Paul Krugman. You've heard of famous economist Paul Krugman. He writes in New York Times today, he said, I too am now going to confess I should have thought harder about the things I held sacred in terms of my belief. And it's what I hope for the future. We shouldn't blindly follow any type of ideology. We should discuss. And there's an important role also for academics, but also for policymakers. You know, end the dogmas and go for practical approaches and allow people, you know, with expertise to express their views. Now, the president has often said, I am open, I am there, you know, please come and, you know, express your reservations about the IMF and so on. Has he actually provided a forum for that to be done? I don't think so. I don't think so, but that is what is needed. But it should have been done before we signed on the dotted line with the IMF, because now they're telling us they were wrong. And I'll tell you another group that is telling us they were wrong is the central bankers of the advanced countries. Jay Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jay Powell, gives testimony to the US Senate in 2021. And you know what he says? He said, we, all of us, used to believe a certain ideology, printing money causes inflation. I now know I was wrong.
Right.
And we now have to relearn economics. Now, these are things we held sacred, but we now know these were wrong.
Thank you very much, Dr. Howard Nicholas, economist. Thank you very much, Rohan Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of PAFREL, P. Madhushani, Program Manager, Political, TISL, Manjula Gajnayak, Executive Director of Institute for Democratic Reforms and Editorial Studies. Thank you very much, Director. Thank you very much, Nadeem, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. As usual, I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. People shouldn't be afraid of their government. Governments should be afraid of their people. Why? Because you hold the power to elect them. Thank you very much. Take care and good night.
TV for life.